Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall in a week where West Ham won a game. We beat Man United 2-1. Whether we deserved it or not is a separate question. I tweeted afterwards, I'm not sure whether we've made a deal with the devil to get 3 points, but it's still a big 3 points. And Erik Ten Hag has gone off the back of this. The right decision? Absolutely. The cruelest moment to do it after his team missed about 7 clear-cut opportunities. Also, probably true. We're going to break into everything that sort of went well at points in this game and then everything that went wrong mostly in the first half of this match as we go through. But yeah, Cal, just initial feelings. You weren't able to make the game this week as you had a complete plumbing disaster in your gaff.
Yeah.
So yeah, how did you feel after the initial watch?
After the initial watch, probably elated because of the way it ended. I think it was a combination of crazy late VAR decision, winning goal, and then sort of battle mode. Let's dig in and really grind this one out, which was kind of left a nice taste in the mouth, so to speak, and you get that buzz of beating United. But yeah, about half an hour later, I realised that actually, flipping heck, I'm not really sure that I should be feeling like this. Yeah, performance-wise, I mean, that first half was atrocious, wasn't it? It truly was awful. And yeah, Ten Hag departure, despite probably one of their better performances, just not their better results of the season in terms of chances created. Like you say, the right decision, but a bizarre one given the context, but potentially also a bit of an insight into what other teams think of us at the moment, because a loss against us is deemed to be a sackable event compared to some of the other atrocious results they've had this season.
Yeah, I suppose also it is sort of a continuation of some of the themes we've seen so far at Man United this season, in the sense that they have really struggled to put away their chances, and there's only so long that can run a team like Man United with the surrounding issues as well. I think probably they've been being bailed out by being able to show quality in moments in games under Ten Hag for quite a long time, and when your quality starts to drift away from you as a sort of differentiating factor that helps you to pick up points and win games, then some of the surrounding issues become more obvious or come into focus a little bit more, and it's easier to pull the trigger in that moment, even if performance actually ends up looking kind of weirdly better in the moment that you end up actually doing it. So, like we say, probably the right choice for Man United, but this isn't a Man United podcast, it's a West Ham podcast, and we need to get straight on to talking about what happened in that first half. Lopetegui set up the lineup and the structure and all of that. We are going to rattle through as fast as we can because we complained a lot last week, and there are a lot of positive things to talk about in the second half. There are a lot of positive performances to speak about in the second half, and I do want that to be the focus of this episode. But I'm going to try and speed through the bad at the start because it must be done. And as you said, horrendous, atrocious, you could use any word. It was one of the worst 45 minutes I think I've ever seen at the London Stadium. United should have been 3-4 nil up after 20 minutes, let alone half time. By half time, it should have been embarrassing. It should have been beyond any other kind of result, half time result we'd ever seen at that ground. And the only reason, frankly, that it wasn't was their profligacy in front of goal. In terms of how it happened from our perspective, a lot of the same themes, right? We intended to go out and be aggressive in our actions. We intended to press as high as up the pitch as we could. We intended to put out a really intense counter press so that every time we lost the ball, we would win it back and be able to sustain and attacks and maintain pressure on the United goal. I must say the first 180 seconds or so looked not too bad when we went out and sent a few players forward, got after it and forced a couple of rush clearances. I thought, oh, here we go. And then those rush clearances started going straight over the top of Kilman and Mavropanos' head, and it was Rashford and Garnacho in behind every 2 minutes. And yeah, I don't even know where to begin, but I guess we have to start talking about the gaps in midfield once more and the expectation of players that perhaps do not have the athletic capability to cover the ground required to do just that and make a press effective when it really obviously isn't going to be.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's a high risk, high reward strategy, right? If you're going to commit to that aggressive of a press, you have to get it right, because as soon as one one link in the chain becomes broken, it's just so easy to pass through. Other teams with slightly more robust is probably not strong, because the midfielders we put out are actually quite robust in their challenges. Certainly more mobile midfielders. It provides a bit of a safeguard against the ineffective counter press, because they have the legs to make up the ground that the opposition have broken through. But when it's a combination of Edson Alvarez and Guido Rodriguez, for all their strengths, if it's been broken through and they're having to track back, it's not really going to look great. Certainly didn't in that first half. Compounded obviously by the fact, as we've talked about week in, week out, the wing backs just being so far up the pitch. If you're able to bypass the wing backs and get into that, you don't even have to get into the space in behind first. You just need to play it in terms of a horizontal line on the pitch ahead of them, and then find someone to attack that space, either with a pass or a direct carry into that space, because you're going to beat them because of how much of a discrepancy there is in terms of your positions on the pitch. So yeah, all of those compounded to create what was, or what should have been, a bloodbath really in that first one. I mean, you talk about the profligacy. I think the Garnacho crossbar just felt like a real moment, like literally within the first few minutes, and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, but maybe went a bit strong with 180 seconds. It might have been more like 100 before that happened.
Yeah, I really felt like that chance, it felt like a bit of a warning shot almost before what then played out. Like everything that we had seen happening and going badly over the past few games, it just all materialized within the first few minutes of the game. And I'd hoped from that it would have been a bit like, oh, okay, crap, yeah, let's just sort of not readjust, because obviously you come into the game with a tactical plan, but certainly make you think, okay, if this carries on for the next 10, 15, we might want to switch it up again. And obviously things did change, but it did take until the second half, and what you, as you put nicely, should have been about 4-0 by then. Somehow we dragged ourselves into half-time and made the necessary changes, but it felt quite painful watching it play out quite so many times without any real on-pitch change. But yeah, like you say, without particularly leggy midfielders, you're always going to be against it if you're pushing your wing-backs quite so far up. But that's been obvious for weeks, so begs the question.
Yeah, I think there were obviously multiple things going on, not only where when we tried to counter-press aggressively, did we struggle with that? We also had situations where, you know, that first chance comes from us trying to build out from the back, and we made mistakes in terms of what we did with the ball certainly in the first sort of 5-10 minutes of the game. A lot of what we did with the ball was really poor. First chance comes from Guido Rodriguez playing the ball kind of blindly into the centre, immediately creates a huge chance for United. And then there's another one just minutes later where Kilman makes a very uncharacteristic error. In fact, both Kilman and Rodriguez, you wouldn't expect those to be the two players that have made errors on the ball in deeper areas to create chances for the opposition, because they've probably been our two best players in terms of their reliability and actual, you know, usefulness, the quality of their actions in build-up. So a bit of surprise from those two. But yeah, I mean, obviously both things come in tandem with the aggression of the rest of the team, the willingness to go so wide, so deep, and to take risk with and without the ball. Lots of situations in the first half where there seemed real confusion again on that right-hand side over who was meant to pick up Garnacho when Wan-Bissaka was forward. There was a couple of situations where Wan-Bissaka, you know, would be tracking back, get halfway back to tracking back, and then start pointing behind him as if someone else should cover it. There was one moment where both Wan-Bissaka and Guido Rodriguez came out and pushed forward, and that left Garnacho completely free down the left. It just looks really weird down that side. You'd expect there to be some sort of better structure to what we're doing in terms of our rest defence, where there's sort of clearer delineation of roles for who's going to pick up that slot when Wan-Bissaka goes forward. And also, you know, frankly, in terms of the personnel we have, it just cannot be Guido Rodriguez. You just cannot play Manchester United, whose main threat in terms of direct attacking is Alejandro Garnacho, and expect Guido Rodriguez or, frankly, Edson Alvarez to cover that space in the wide areas, because they're just not quick enough. They're just going to get outpaced every single time, which is what we saw, really. It's been a bit of a sharp wake-up call in terms of the defensive midfielders we have, I think, hasn't it? In terms of, you know, this idea we want to go and try and be a more aggressive team. We want to transition into being a more aggressive team, a team that can press more aggressively. on paper, you think those two guys would do just fine. Edson does a lot of running around, and Guido does a lot of dual dominating in a smaller area. It seems like a decent partnership to run out with when you want to go and press. They just can't move fast, can they? And it creates huge problems, because all of the time in that first half, anytime United are trying to play out, I mean, you see us trying to cut the pitch and then press aggressively on one side of the pitch, and then it's like the defensive midfielder on the far side who's then got to come up and press in. It's just late every single time. So it's so easy for one of the Man United forwards to drop in, bounce the ball back, and then Bruno Fernandes, whoever it is, Casemiro, any of the centre-backs, just time on the ball then to spray the ball out to the other side, to a winger who's got huge space, or to just go straight over the top of the defence, because the defensive line is so high. So I think, yeah, really sharp wake-up call in terms of actually just the baseline elements of like what is possible for this group.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the primary issue that I can see is that the high line element of it. I think the two of them, as you've said, are capable of doing the pressing stuff, but in smaller areas. And if there wasn't such a gap between, well, I guess the keeper and the goal, but then also the midfield and the defence, and all the gaps that open up thereafter once you've been bypassed, like I think you could probably afford, and we'll come on to it, I guess, because it's not miles away from what actually did play out in the end, but I think you can still play a really intense pressing game, but without necessarily having the high line that comes with it. Obviously, I think the best presses function when you have the high line as well, because you can squeeze the pitch, but that's no use if it's so easy to bypass. Like if you don't have a Virgil van Dijk or a Mickey van der Ven who can eat up that ground and bail you out when you do play that high line. And I think to continue to try and do it without obviously having the personnel that can do it is kind of crazy. And I think, yeah, a slightly deeper line, but with the same amount of intensity would probably work better, because it really does just take away some of those issues that you have to, that are necessitated by the system if you do run it out in the way that we have been.
I mean, a high line in two senses, though, right? Not just the line of the defence, but also just the line of engagement.
Yeah.
You know, at times we're trying to engage so high up the pitch with so many numbers that then compounds the issues, like you say, in terms of the gaps between the midfield and the defence, or the midfield and the front line that are going to press. And before we come on to it, because it really this conversation directly leads into what changed in the second half and how we managed to be so much better in the second half. Just a sort of a brief word on some of the ideas with the ball. I mean, we've spoken about this so many times, so I almost feel like we can skate over it. But, you know, so many times we commit high, we get the ball used. Actually, as compared to the first few weeks where we were saying main issue is we're not using the players who are overlapping, you know, fullbacks in loads of space. We're actually using Wan-Bissaka a huge amount in this game. Combinations down the right side in that first half are probably the best thing we did, right? Yep. Antonio, Bowen, Wan-Bissaka, some wonderful combination play down that side, some really nice 1-2s, always finding Wan-Bissaka in space, looking for the passes now to Emerson and Wan-Bissaka. Both fullbacks managed to overlap into dangerous positions in the first half several times. They just don't have the quality to make anything out of those situations, do they? Ultimately, I mean, they just don't do anything when they arrive in the positions that, you know, that they do. Sometimes that's about them. Sometimes I think it's also about the players that we have in the box. You know, Mikel Antonio's movement inside the box is not necessarily up there with some of the best strikers in the Premier League. You've also got situations where players crashing don't arrive in the right areas, which then necessitates or forces crosses that are more difficult for fullbacks. I really liked there was an example in the Ipswich game this weekend where, you know, Davis's cross when Ipswich are down for 10 men to Delap. I'm not sure if you've seen that goal. It's just outstanding, unbelievable ball into the box. He never makes that ball if Delap doesn't make such a good run. You know, the ball is impossible without the run. And I think there is a confluence of sort of two issues where we probably don't have a high-level operator inside of the box in terms of moving well and creating space and creating crossing opportunities for the players in wide areas. And then also, I don't think the wide area, the players who are arriving in the wide areas have the quality to make the most of those moments anyway themselves, or really create advantage themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's not going to come from the forward, you almost want Wan-Bissaka to maybe go past someone or create a yard so that he can get across him. But a lot of the time, he's arriving in the final third after maybe dribbling three players in the middle of the pitch. But when he's got to dribble an opposition fullback, that's not going to happen. So yeah, I think really in summary, what you see then is you know, little of the advantage of committing players so high up the pitch, you know, it doesn't actually lead to us creating anything. I think this is also, again, twofold. One, because we don't create anything off those moments initially, and then we win quite a few set pieces, and we can't take a corner to save our lives, nor a free kick. I mean, it's genuinely unbelievable how bad our set pieces are this season. And then we get all the negatives, right? So you finish up with a first half where you've conceded, 5, 6, 7 glaring opportunities, whether that be, maybe the 4 opportunities where they actually generate good chances off the back of it, and maybe the 3 or 4 other moments where they missed the final ball as well, or the final ball was a bit too heavy, or Fabianski just about managed to get there and perform a sweeping action or whatever. I think, just basically the worst of both worlds. Everything that could possibly go wrong with setting up to play that way went wrong, save for the opposition putting the ball in the back of the net in that first half. And then the second half, we're having this conversation again. It's almost like reverse Spurs. Like sort of David Moyes with a bit of a Spanish twist in the second half. Back to a lower line, back to a much lower line of engagement, slap out a cheeky little 5-4-1, and guess what? We're quite good on the counter-attack.
Yeah, I felt Antonio carrying as well, in particular. It's so funny, isn't it, that this many years on, we're still talking about how...
Wow, Mikel Antonio, when he's got space in behind. It's wild, isn't it?
Reliant. We really thought we wouldn't be here in the year of 2024, and the back end of it, to say the least. But we are still talking about how crucial Antonio's ball carrying abilities are for us on the break. But yeah, if you're going to have to revert to that style, and that's not me saying that I don't think we should have. I think we absolutely should have. It's me saying that 2 years ago I thought we might have got to a place that wasn't this. But here we are. But yeah, it worked. I was glad to see the changes made. Again, question marks about why you need to make 3 changes at half time, because I don't think you should necessarily find yourself in that scenario as often as we seem to be doing. However, as a lot of people have said already, so we don't need to do this in big detail because I think it's sort of surface level stuff, but it does take guts to make 3 massive changes at half time. So you've got to credit him for that, and you've got to credit him for his proactivity. But I think you put it on your Twitter, Jack, like you have to question, like, okay, you can praise him for his proactivity, but also we need to criticise him for the fact that he's putting himself in this position time and time again, because that is not great. But yeah, I think all the players that came on had a real impact, and we'll obviously go into that in a lot more detail. But yeah, just back to basic stuff, isn't it? Foot off the gas a little bit, drop a little bit deeper, safeguard all of the players against their weaknesses that the system is exposing with such regularity. And whoops, lo and behold, we managed to basically limit United to shots from outside the box for most of the second half, I would say, bar a few good chances. If you look at the map, there's about 8, I think, from outside the box, which is what you want, right? Especially with players like Kilman, especially when you introduce Souček to the box. You see all of the upside within literally the first 10 minutes. So, yeah, frustrating, but pleasing that it actually happened and it wasn't another 45 minutes where we should have conceded 5.
One wonders at this point whether Lopetegui is actually, intentionally creating the crisis every single week just to show off. I really know how to fix a disaster. I'm really skilled at, on-the-fly decision-making, working out what needs to change to make us a lot better. I'm going to make the situation as bad as possible to be able to do that. Look, the best thing about the first half was that it was still 0-0. I don't know how the platform was still intact, but it was. And then it became about, can you make the right choices to fix things? And he certainly did. I think the changes in the second half, if we're getting to the point where we can now give credit after sort of prefacing it with a big dollop of criticism, really well done. All good changes, all the correct changes, I would suggest. Todibo on for Mavropanos, perhaps enforced more by Mavropanos' yellow card, because I don't think Mavro had a particularly bad first half. He was dominant in a couple of the aerial duels. The only big glaring error he made was when Bruno Fernandes ran into the box for that headed opportunity and he didn't pick up the run. And we have talked about Mavropanos on crosses before this season. But yeah, Todibo came on. I thought Todibo was sensational, involved in both of the goals, pretty much killed Man United's opportunities to play him behind Stone Dead because he's so good on the cover. Handled all of those moments superbly. Souček, not sure why he didn't start, and we'll come on to that. I have no idea really why he didn't start. He's been our most reliable midfielder. And he comes on and does exactly the same stuff again here. Duel winning, more aerial duels won in the second 45 than anyone managed in the entire 90. So yeah, an excellent performance, doing exactly what you'd expect Thomas Suchek to do. I actually think he did a really good job as well for the first goal, little bounce pass that he plays where so many other players would try and turn and run forward. You know, just simple things like that. Seems to be doing that kind of thing really well. A couple of really nice moments in deeper build-up as well. I've seen him do a few really nice things in build-up over the last few weeks, where he's just making good decisions in important moments. So I thought he was a massive positive addition and hugely helped in terms of our just competency in midfield and our ability to actually go and win some duels in that area. And then Crysencio Summerville. We're going to talk later about why he didn't start and how we feel about him not starting. But that second half performance, we've pretty much been saying this all season, right? That there's going to be a moment where Crysencio gets the final action right, and then he will be undeniable at the point that he does that. Well, here we are. Yep. That's this week, right? He put it together, and this was as near a complete performance as you could possibly get from a winger in a counter-attacking structure. In any game, he was exceptional.
Yeah, 100%. I think what was most pleasing, apart from the celebration, actually, I thought that was really good, because I think there's been a lot of chat about how you manage all the players in the dressing room and get them the time and etc. And to see him go over and sort of first acknowledge Lopetegui for bringing him on, and then go and celebrate with Kudus after he'd done that, I thought was really nice to see. But I think, yeah, it was pleasing to see him do all of the things that we've come to expect of Kudus, and have very little drop off in terms of stylistic profile, just level of performance. And then with the added upside of him being on his preferred side and doing all of those Kudus things, rather than Kudus sort of sometimes being forced because of the sort of body position of the defender. He's often forced to the byline, which is fine, because at times it's great to go to the byline, but you can tell sometimes when he's out on that left wing that he wants to drift inside more naturally, but he can't quite fashion the angle because he doesn't feel as confident dribbling on his weaker foot and cutting inside. So he tries to go the long way round and then dart sort of almost horizontally along the byline to get into the box, whereas Summerville was finding himself in the same positions and just backing himself to take his man on the inside every time, and wriggling through challenges sort of in the same way that Kudus does with the upper body strength, and not just going down to win the free kick, but having that determination in the right moments to carry on. There obviously are times when you do want to go down because you're running down a blind alley, but yeah, really, really impressive performance. And I think we mentioned about how Kudus' absence is obviously a disappointment, but also it does sort of free the stage of one of its biggest players, right? And creates an opportunity for someone to step up, whether that was going to be Soler, whether that was going to be Summerville. We didn't know, because we didn't know what the lineup was going to look like. But I'm so glad that even though Summerville didn't get given the start, which, as we say, we'll come on to, he absolutely took the bull by the horns when he did come on. And I think it would be very difficult not to pick him for the next game, really, given the performance that he did put in.
It's near impossible. Yeah. You just can't drop a player who plays that well. Yeah. He was fantastic. He was phenomenal. I do think we have to contextualise all of these performances to Debo, Souček, Summerville within the structural changes. We've already spoken about. I skated over it, so slap out a 5-4-1 and go counter attack. Right. To be honest, it wasn't too far off that. It wasn't necessarily always a 5-4-1. I thought the second half was quite curious in the sense that for much of the second half, and I've watched it 3 times, I'm not entirely sure what Alvarez was, whether he was a centre-back or just an extremely deep midfielder that was allowed to join the back line when he wanted and become a midfielder when he wanted. Whatever the case may be, he didn't go and press in the same way that he did in the first half. He was always deeper, which meant when United were able to get through, there was always an extra player. When we committed high, there was always an extra player. There's actually a moment that sums this up perfectly where United broke, and Julen took a shot from outside the box and Fabianski saved it, and Rashford is on the right hand side. and the player with him is Edson Alvarez. And in the first half, there would have been no one there. It would have been Mavropanos would have had to have gone wide. In this case, it's Todibo that has to go wide. Kilman would have then had to have come across, and then it would have been a free pass out to the right-hand side to the over to the spare player on the flank, and a chance to go 1v1. We saw that throughout the first half, and then we see the benefits that we have been banging on about on this podcast of having an extra player back in your rest defence unit. In fact, I would have 2 extra players back, but at least we got 1 in the second half, and it made us so much better in those moments. So yeah, you have him in a deeper position. You have the general line of engagement a million miles further back in the second half. So it's a lot of striker being released to go and press. Sometimes the wing backs get forward to try and press as well. But apart from that, the sort of main block of your team, the 3 central defenders, or the 2 defenders plus Alvarez, and then your 2 midfielders don't really move too much. They stay and block up the centre of the pitch. I thought the way that we pressed to the outside worked very, 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 very well. I loved that move to kind of always force United to the flanks and then converge around the ball and win it. I thought it worked so well for us. Really limited their opportunities to play into Fernandes in dangerous areas. It really limited their opportunities to play off 9, which I don't think they were able to do for almost the entire second half. I think that's where they're at their best, when it's either Bruno in dangerous positions or they play off 9, whether it's Xerxes or Højlund dropping in and flicking the ball through to wingers. Without that, they looked like a very limited team that really lacked quality ultimately. It obviously makes you ask the question. I mean, I think a lot of these things are obvious pre-game, and it makes you ask the question why you don't start with a kind of system and a structure that enables you to make them look quite so poor. But at least we saw it in the second half, and like we say, all 3 of those players were crucial to that. But that move to just being deeper, blocking up the centre of the pitch much more effectively, both tactically in terms of the way that you press, and then also in terms of just the general height of the team. Yeah, and then also, I think in terms of what we could do with the ball, I mean, we were far less aggressive. We wanted to dominate it a lot less. The cost to us was 1% possession difference between the first half and the second half, but you go from creating no chances in the first half to creating loads in the second half. We created loads of chances in the second half, and they all come because actually we've got a group of players that are really, 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 really good on the break.
Yeah, I think that's 100% it. I think 2 things that I wanted to reference here. The first one about the you wanting to have 2 extra players in the rest defence. I think I completely agree, and I think what was particularly surprising was that when I saw the lineup, I was like, oh, okay, Guido and Alvarez in the same team. Sweet. He must have recognised that we need a little bit of extra steel at the back, and therefore he's brought in both of them, and therefore one of them is going to just sit and keep it sure at the back all times. And I was like, wait, no, we're doing the exact same thing, just with a slightly worse personnel to do it. I was like, this is crazy. It's not as if we've not seen this play out badly anyway, and instead we're going to introduce another slow midfielder into the mix and take off one of our rapid wingers and play a central midfielder out on the left. So I was like, this is just bizarre decision making. We'll come on to that decision in a bit, but yeah, I think from what I saw in the second half, and it's probably going to be disappointing because I know everyone wants to see us reach a point where we have much greater control and stuff like that, but I think we controlled it well without the ball. We dominated our box pretty well in defence, and I think this, at least for this little mini epoch under Lopetegui, needs to be the blueprint. I think it's kind of felt like we've tried to run a little bit before we can walk in these first 10 or so games, in that we're trying to go straight into the Lopetegui blueprint without having done the sort of baby steps to get to what the final version of Lopetegui ball is, in that we've not quite got the perfect cast for it yet, because obviously we don't have the full, as we've said in the first half, we don't have the right personnel to be able to fully commit to the high intense press, and equally I think we don't yet have, I don't know if it's personnel or the midfield blend we haven't quite landed on yet, or it's a sort of combination of the system not getting the best out of the players, but we haven't shown, at least so far, that we can maintain control via possession that effectively at all. And I think, as you were saying, if you've got a squad of players where you're going to ask a lot of the stuff to come from the fullbacks, but you don't have the fullbacks who can create chances on a sixpence every time. You therefore need to have a much higher volume of possession so that you create more and more crossing opportunities, so that it's more likely that you're going to have a high quality chance created. But when you're still relying on 45-ish % possession in most games, but you don't have players that are going to get you the assist almost every time, it just doesn't, it's just not an effective system, because you're not creating the high enough frequency of chances for sort of the law of averages to work in your favour, essentially. So I think when you acknowledge both of those issues, in that we don't really quite have the midfield yet to do our in possession or out of possession stuff as much as, or as well as we would like to, I think simplifying it like we did in the second half needs to be sort of the model going forward, because it gets the best out of everyone, both in and out of possession. Yes, it's probably not as big of an advancement as people would have hoped for post-Moyes, because it feels too similar almost. It doesn't feel like we've really moved on or we've progressed. But at what cost, really? Like, do you want to see us continue to try and progress but not pick up points and win games that we should? Or do you want to see us be competitive against these big teams and then take it from there? And once you've built that solid base, you can go, okay, sweet, now let's move the defensive line 5 yards higher up the pitch, because we feel confident that we've nailed the basics now. But until then, I think, yeah, it needs to be strip it back to basics, get everyone comfortable with that, and then drip feed little bits of progressiveness, I guess. And also that comes, it's not going to be game by game. I think it comes with adding little bits to the squad as well, like adding those players with slightly more legs in midfield, adding those slightly more ball confident players across the pitch. I think we're getting there, but as I say, we tried to do it all a little bit too quickly, I think, when you've still got a bit of hangover from an era that is so far removed from what everyone wanted this era to become.
It's interesting that you would put it in those terms. I think for me, I would look at it less as a hangover of the previous era and just look at it as a bit of a disaster of confluence of bad profiling and bad recruitment for the new manager, and then bad imposition of tactics over the top of a group that don't seem to understand what they're being asked to do. Like, I think it's fair to say that there is some change from where we were to where we want to be under Lopetegui, and it's fair to say that change is significant. I wouldn't suggest that it is so significant that it's impossible to do that over the course of 3-4 months. I think that it should be doable over that space of time. I think more what's happened is that the implementation has been really quite poor. I think some of the decision making in terms of the match plan defensive or out of possession tactics has been really, really poor. I think there's no other way to put it than that, frankly. I think some of the match plan stuff has been a disaster. And Lopetegui's admitted much at points. Like, he admitted after the Chelsea game that he said, "Look at me, don't look at the players. When I have to make first half substitutions, this is about me, not the players." So I think some of that stuff has just gone really badly wrong. I think that's more what I would look at, in combination with simple things that we've been speaking about repeatedly, like, if you're going to make the wing backs really important to what you do, or the fullbacks really important to what you do in attack, then make sure that your fullbacks are good in those moments, or make sure that you have a high level box operator, at least one of the two, but none in both camps, and you're just going to struggle to create chances. If you're going to have none, make sure you've got a set piece taker. You don't have that. That's a problem. I also think whatever you do in this division, attempting to play that the way we have done for much of the season, in terms of the lack of cover, in terms of rest defence, having a 2-1 or even a 2-0 defensively, the quality that teams have on the break in this league, you will lose games. You will lose matches. Even if you were defending with the ball better than we are, you will still lose games because you're leaving yourself too exposed at the back. And there are just too many good, speedy wingers in the league. And also, I think there's a general move in the division, which we're going to come on to at the end of the podcast and talk about in more detail. So I think hangover from Moyes, sure, a little bit. More that there have been a real number of issues at play this season, which has kind of reversed us into a corner of having to play what is ultimately a very similar brand of football to last season, a counter-attacking low block that focuses on using ball carriers to exploit space and attack 1v1s against opposition players in space at speed and generate chances like that. again, I think even in those conditions, there are things like not having a set piece taker that are probably going to be a little bit problematic for us now, even if we try and play that way. I think also that in other matches there might be moments where Todibo physically isn't necessarily the right guy to play that way. But I think what is key and what is obvious is what you started with, which is that the second half performance was instructive. Whichever way you look at it, it was so much better than anything we've tried to do when we've attempted to do something a bit more similar to what Lopetegui has wanted to do from minute one. That it's very difficult to say at this point that it makes any sense to continue doing that and to not just pivot to something that is at least mid-blocky and focused on our strengths in transition to attack and focused on being more direct with the ball, because we're good, because the players are good at it. When you have guys like Summerville, Bowen, Kudus, Antonio, Paquetá, even Wan-Bissaka, man. Like Wan-Bissaka as a carrier from deep is a bit of a
surprise.
It's a bit of a special ability to have in your squad, right? We can break two lines for you and take a couple of players out of the game in transition. You've got Emerson too, who's not bad at that himself. So I think, especially with Kilman in the squad now as well, who showed in the last 10-15 minutes of the match that I've done a lot of sort of fancy stuff with the ball, but when it comes on and I've got to head the ball out of the box, I'm actually fucking great at that stuff too. I think it just makes sense to move in that direction off the back of this. So on that point, I absolutely agree. We're going to take another quick break now, and then we're going to come on to some of the better performances to come out of this match. We've covered Todibo, Souček and Summerville, who really were three of the biggest standout performers from the bench. Footnote for Danny Ings as well, who I think did everything you would want from a substitute striker for final 20 minutes. Chased ferociously, which was great. Always made sure that, sometimes it was a bit unfashionable, but the ball came near him and it just, whatever direction it bounced off him, it went closer to Man United's goal, which is just a good thing to be doing in the conditions he arrived in the game at. And then, one, it's never a penalty for me.
One Stonewall penalty. I don't know what you're on about. I would have been livid. I would have been livid.
Well, Darren Fletcher was.
I was going to say,
was two seats down from me.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, and this was covered a lot in The Athletic and in other papers after the game because it was in the press box. He was furious. Effing and blinding, and then leaving pretty quickly afterwards. So I can understand that.
Because we see it on the screens, don't we? I was thinking, how did he see it from there? But he must have seen the replay on the little screen at the desk, and then.
Do you know? I think it was almost more frustrating for them because there was no communication to anyone in the press box that there was a VAR check for the penalty, and then so. We only found out once the referee went over to the monitor. We then didn't get a replay at all. So what ended up happening was the analyst teams themselves started chopping up through their own footage with their tack cams and trying to look for it. And then they were able to show Mr. Fletcher the replay from that. And yes, he was not happy, and I could understand. In fact, none of them were happy. And I found myself empathizing because I was leaning across to get a look myself. And I don't think it was a penalty. But look, the point was that Ings did a very good job of just throwing his body in and trying to win a penalty, which is ultimately what he managed to do. So yes, footnote for Ings did a good job. The other three players we want to come to and talk about are Fabianski, Antonio and Alvarez. We've spoken really about Antonio already. So let's do Fabianski. And I didn't expect him to come back in. I thought Areola would get a little bit more trust. He obviously played really, really incredibly badly against Spurs. I thought it would have been a bit cruel almost to go, right, that's it, see you later. But Fabianski is pushing, and maybe it's a bit harsh on Fabianski to not do that because clearly, off the back of this, he's still a very good goalkeeper. And pretty much in every aspect, he outshone Areola in terms of what Areola's done so far this season, sweeping, playing out from the back, composure under pressure, Lucas Fabianski, shot stopping, dominating the box, save one moment where Alvarez nearly scored an own goal, but I think that was probably a bit more about Alvarez than it was about
I'd agree.
Fabianski, just because I'm so used to hearing Fabianski from the stands. He's a really noisy keeper. I thought he was brilliant. Some fantastic saves, some great balls forward. Just an outstanding goalkeeper performance.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you picked up the composure. I think passing was the first place I was always going to go and look this week, just in terms of how accurate was his distribution. And I went straight for the long, but he had recorded 100% accuracy in both short and medium, which was like, okay, Fabs. I didn't know you had that in you. But then the long passing as well. I mean, 66.7% is a marked improvement from what we saw from Areola last week. There was one pass that I'm pretty sure I audibly exclaimed and was like, whoa, what ball. I think it was to Emerson. He just like a clipped one near to the halfway line and he just took it down. I was like, whoa, okay, now that's what we needed to see last week against Spurs and didn't have it. So there you go. And then, as you say, the shot stopping, obviously there's that one reflex save moment. But I wanted to just wrap up the praise for Fabianski in the sense that in a game where Andre Onana was playing and he is largely deemed to be one of, if not the best distributors from sort of goalkeeping positions, he recorded
from goalkeeping positions.
I think what I meant was long distribution from deep areas, but I just decided to just create some new terminology that shouldn't exist. But he managed to record just 31.3% accuracy from 16 long balls. Fab on more than double that. So, what better way to show your credentials than to outperform the most progressive goalkeeper in goalkeeping positions, which I'm gonna coin now. But was really pleasing. Really enjoyed it, and I also didn't think he would come in. I feel like the goalkeeper is the person you least want to change generally because it's so normalised to have a number one, and it's so important that they have that relationship with the centre backs, which is only really built through substantial amounts of time on the pitch together. But fair play, and I guess another example of Lopetegui being proactive in his decision making and it paying off, to be fair to him as well.
Absolutely. If you tune into extra time, which we always do after this podcast, it's an extra 30 minutes of Analytics United West Ham breakdown goodness. We will be joined by Darcy, who can attest to the fact that I do like shouting out ball playing goalie every time I watch so-called ball playing goalies. And there was a lot of that this week with Andre Onana, who was doing some wonderful getting pressed by one player and sending the ball to nowhere. I very much enjoyed it. And that mostly came from Antonio, who we've spoken about. What more can we say? I suppose the only things we haven't mentioned would be how well he pressed, which he did do a very good job of, and then also how well he linked. 2 moments where he got it horrendously wrong. It's Mikel Antonio. When does that not happen? But there were plenty more moments where he got it right and did a fantastic job. Very rare that we see Antonio dropping into sort of deeper positions and linking play as well as he did in this game. But it was lovely to see. Good bit of progress, something that he's going to need to do more often under Lopetegui if he wants to keep the spot. Say when Fulkrug comes back, I don't think that will happen. But if he plays like he did against
or Antonio,
either. But like I say, if he plays like he did in this game, which was comfortably his best performance of the season in the Premier League, then he'll have a chance. He was fantastic, and certainly if we move to being a bit more of a counter-tracking team, then he becomes a massive asset immediately. Again, really, Edson Alvarez, he ran as fast as his legs could carry him, and. Within that context, I thought he did quite a good job. He put out as many fires as he could in the first half. There were a couple of situations. I think it was one where Garnacho got in behind. He did an amazing job of getting across to cover it, make the tackle, sent it out for a corner, and then he nearly headed it into his own net. Kind of like negated the success of the initial action. But anyway, the point stands. I thought in the moments where we desperately needed someone to do something, it felt like it was Alvarez quite a few times. So fair play to him. And then the two players that we have to speak about in this section, we're running incredibly short on time, so I need to speed us through this. But we've said so many times, I think 3 times in this podcast, we said, we'll talk about that later. So here we are. It's Soler and Paquetá. Soler started this game, and I think you want to defend the decision to start him on paper.
Yep.
And then we have to talk about why actually in real terms it didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you say, in the interest of time, we can keep this one short because we did a lot of the defending or making the case for Carlos Soler starting in the previous in the preview show that we recorded last week before the game.
Join us on Patreon. That's how you get that.
Exactly. Nice plug. But yeah, it was largely about the notion that we wanted to absolve Paquetá of some of the responsibilities, both in and out of possession, that he was obviously burdened with and seemingly troubled by throughout the course of the season so far, that come with playing in that number 8/10 role, and put him back in a position where there's far less responsibility and where he has shown on a consistent basis at West Ham that he can perform, which is out in that left wing slot. It also gets the best out of Emerson on the left-hand side because of the relationship they have and because of Emerson's tendency and preference to overlap. And we felt as though in this fixture, with the absence of Kudus and the way that we anticipated that we would play, that it made sense for all those reasons. You give Paquetá one more chance to step up his performance levels this season in a position that he is likely to perform better in before you then start questioning whether he starts or not. And it also gives Carlos Soler an opportunity to play in the central midfield role because we think he will be slightly less direct than Paquetá in those midfield areas and then give us a little bit more control than we saw in the first half. And then none of it made sense because he decided to play Carlos Soler at left wing and Paquetá in midfield, which meant that Paquetá was not absolved of any of the responsibilities, and we also didn't get any of the benefits of Paquetá playing out on the left wing.
Nor any of the benefits of having Soler on the pitch.
Yeah, exactly. So it was
just a
complete
mad worst of both worlds decision that, of all of the decisions we made in the first half, perhaps made the least sense. I cannot wrap my head around what the thinking was with playing Soler over Summerville if you were going to play Soler on the wing. And that was pretty well summed up by the first half, where Soler frankly didn't do anything wrong, but just wasn't in the game. At all, really. Never got into the game. No, there's no point in doing that. There's just no point. I don't want to see it again. I think it's so obvious, isn't it? I mean, Paquetá does so many good things out on the left, even in this game, in the moments where he popped up on the left and was allowed to drift into those areas, he started playing really well. And Soler kind of did a lot of the actions that I'd want him to be doing in the middle of the park, but don't really want him to be doing if he's the left winger. Do you know, like, just an odd situation that makes very little sense to me. And hopefully lessons were learned is all I'll say.
I feel bad for Soler as well because I think a lot of people have said what a pointless signing, he's so ineffective, blah 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 after the game, but he's been sent out to he's just been screwed basically. Like you can't expect him to perform in that position when he's not really ever played there. He's always been either like a sort of metronomic number 8 that sits and keeps things ticking over in the centre of the park, or a 10 who actually can do a little bit of damage in the box and has got decent
of a goal scoring 10.
But you're putting him in a position where he can't do either of those things, and frankly the ball doesn't actually really find him ever anyway, because the person that you want to be in the middle of the park accessing the left winger is the one that's actually playing at left wing. So completely bizarre. And as you say, I think we weren't upset to see Summerville start on the bench because we felt as though there were definite justifications for playing Soler. But as soon as I saw him out on that left wing, I was practically counting to half time and praying that the change would happen. Glad it did.
Tiny note for Paquetá. Came off, I think, because he was booked. Because his performance actually wasn't that bad. I think it's a kind of a weird first half to talk about because we've not really said anyone played badly. And I think that's because structurally it was such a disaster. You know, I think actually in terms of their individual actions, maybe apart from Guido Rodriguez and Kilman, who did have a bit of a poor first half, I don't think anyone else did too much wrong. They were being asked to do things that they just weren't physically or athletically capable of doing. And then you pay the price as a result. But in terms of when they actually got on the ball or when they got to duels, they did an okay job for the most part, a lot of them. And Paquetá, certainly for the first 20-25 minutes, which were generally disastrous, was probably one of our better players in that period of the match. And like I said, when he did get the opportunity to drift out left and combine with Emerson, there were some really nice moments there. So maybe a tiny kernel of hope that he might be slightly turning a corner, or might have slightly turned a corner in this match. Who knows? It'd be really interesting to see what the selection is in the middle for the next match, because I think this match itself has kind of thrown it all up in the air in terms of who you pick now as the three players in the centre of the pitch, or the two. I know we have a lot of questions about back five versus back four. Structure first, I think, is the most important thing to think about when we're talking about these things. It's not so much back five or back four. It's about whether you set up deep to counter-attack or whether you set up high to press. And I think what we're seeing is more that deep to counter-attack is better for us at the moment, whether that's a 5 or a 4. We didn't get to speak about it earlier. We've run out of time, so there's no room to do this. But I think I do want to tack it on right at the end, because we've referenced it a few times and we need to put it in context. We've spoken a few times about the change in the league away from sort of a more defend with the ball, Guardiola-esque style, to something that's a little bit more focused on direct attacks, something that's a little bit more focused on moments in transition, and generally just seeing the speed of the game maybe notch up a little bit further in the Premier League, which you would think was impossible, but here we are. Yeah, if you could sort of put that in context for us in terms of what's happening in the league, and then maybe that sheds a bit of light on the awkwardness of the moment where we are, because we're perhaps one of maybe, I would say, 2 teams in the division moving in the other direction.
Yeah, basically, I think that's a nice point to leap off from, but again, in the interest of time, we'll keep it snappy, but essentially what's happening is that more and more often, or teams that you would consider to be elite are more and more willing to accept a direct approach if it is deemed to be sufficiently beneficial. And now you have a pack of teams in the sort of, I guess, the median area, the average area, which sort of includes us, Brighton, Palace, Fulham, Villa, Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham, and United, and Liverpool slightly below, Brentford in there as well, who are all very much within a similar range in terms of how direct they are. And the measure of directness is a crude one, I guess, but it's the best we've got. But yeah, it's sort of how many, the sort of territorial gain and linked to the sort of duration of a passing sequence. So for as long as a passing sequence is, how much territory do you gain and how quickly? And it's measured in meters per second. And every one of those teams that we just mentioned is sort of working within a similar sort of range. The only real outlier amongst the elite teams is City, which I guess is what you would expect. They sort of play this less direct, high possession approach.
Well, you would expect them to be an outlier, but you'd expect the rest of the sort of big six, if you like, to be chasing them rather than moving away in the other direction.
That's exactly it. So you'd expect them to be an outlier, as you've said, but the fact there's no one around them apart from Southampton, which probably shines a light on exactly what Russell Martin's trying to do at Southampton as well, is really interesting. And I suppose the final interesting quirk before I try and tie up why I think it is that the third least direct side in the league, which I suppose tells you about how far in the opposite direction the league is actually moving, is Wolves, who you would expect to be one of the most direct sides in the league based on what our assumptions are about sort of the correlation between league position and directness, because everyone assumes teams at the bottom are going to be more counter-attacking and teams at the top are going to be more possession dominant.
Also squad, right? Like Dawson, Cunha, Hwang. I know Hwang's not fit this season, but you know, like that, you look at that group of players and you'd expect them to be a more direct group.
Absolutely. And also potentially you look at that group of players and look at them being in 20th and go, why are you not being more direct? And maybe this is the reason you are down there, because you're trying to do things that you shouldn't be trying. But I think, generally, I mean, there's a lot that's been made of this recently, and I think there's probably 2 things that I would see as being associated with it, is that there is this sort of parallel shift of elite teams going for the focal point number 9, who's like 6'4", 6'5", like a Haaland. Havertz at Arsenal as well as being used in a similar...
Darwin Nunez, I know he's not playing, but...
Similar sort of thing. They're the sort of in vogue striker at the minute, and it's sort of that marriage between prolific finisher in the box, but also someone that if you are slightly more backs to the wall, you can reliably smash it up to, and they're going to either carry into the space or bring it down and play a winger in. Something that 5 or so seasons ago you just wouldn't see from those top teams, because everyone was playing around with the false 9 and dropping in and being a lot more possession comfortable, possession dominant. And I guess this kind of screws Lopetegui a bit, because we're trying to, as you say, move towards this sort of possession-based system that sort of sees us commit too many men forward, and at the same time you're now coming up against more and more and more teams who are willing to play the exact style of football that is going to basically destroy that system. Teams where previously you probably thought you might get away with it because they were so preoccupied with having that possession dominance and not really using those moments. They'd rather just have so much of the ball and back themselves to create enough chances to win. Whereas now they're like, you know what, okay, we'll have most of the ball anyway, but if an opportunity arises, we're not too proud to go long, basically. Which, yeah, I think is a very interesting quirk to see.
And also perhaps a little surprised that in that context that City was the team of the top 6 that we've played so far, or the big 6 that we played so far, that we were most competitive against.
Yeah.
Because perhaps they are less likely to utilise those moments,
Exactly.
as you say, more keen to keep the ball, which made us look better, where other teams are just now pinging it into the space straight away because they're confident that they're going to be able to make use of those moments because they've got the quality to do it. And the only reason United didn't slap us 4-5-0 is because they didn't put the ball in the back of the net, really. Otherwise, I think this game would have been very similar to Chelsea, very similar to Spurs. It would have been the same story, frankly. Yeah, it's like swimming upstream, and it's sort of classic West Ham, right? In the sense that it feels like we're about 3 years behind the tactical development of the league all the time, if not more.
We turned up to the party, but the police had already shut it down, and now we're still trying to have fun, but everyone's gone home and gone to bed.
Kind of exactly. It's like we've walked in and gone, we're defending with the guys. What's happened? We're here now. We're ready. We've figured it out. Defend with the ball, yeah? Isn't that what we're doing? Oh, okay. Well, we want to counter attack.
Shit.
Wow. Yeah, I really enjoyed the sort of like, Southampton after the Man City game, they beat them 1-0, and all the Man City players, they're so good, they just really, they don't deserve to be down the bottom of the league.
Russell Martin to replace Pep.
Shut up. Sorry, there's my inner David Moyes is just...
I do wonder as well if it's the natural consequence of more and more teams gradually doing the whole high press and high line thing, and that therefore, like, the teams at the bottom half of the table are trying to do that shit now, and therefore the teams at the top of the table that started that trend have gone, sweet, well, we're just going to do what you used to do because you're doing what we used to do, and it's just like that cycle of everyone's come back around to the top, and now we're back to 4-4-2 mid blocks with big target men and quick dribbly wingers at the best teams rather than the worst ones.
Yeah, and our sort of Benji Lanyardo coined "sexy to unsexy" process is always on the wrong side of the sort of cyclical development of the league. Really, really sort of quite an interesting way to look at it, I think, and perhaps illuminates at least a little of what's going on at the moment. That's it. That's all we have time for. We've gone over again this week. We're terrible, and. Look, we're going to go over even further. We've got extra time coming up straight afterwards with Darcy and Charlie joining us to talk about this week in a bit more depth. I'm going to talk about what it was like sitting in the press box with Man United's analysis team for this one. There were some very funny moments and also a couple of press conference bits to wrap up as well. So yeah, join us for that over on Extra Time. Patreon.com/Analytics United. First 7 days free. We've got loads of really cool stuff over there. And I truly believe that if you try out the free trial, you'll really enjoy some of the stuff that we're working on, some of the stuff that we put up, whether that's me and Cal waffling on or Darcy doing some really interesting data stuff. If you like data viz, there's loads of good stuff over there too. On that side of things, Darcy's tableaus pre-match are just incredible, really give you a great idea of what you're looking at every single game. So yeah, please jump over there if you're interested in more West Ham stuff, in more Analytics United. And thank you for listening. Thank you, Cal.
Thank you.
Big 3 points, chance to build momentum. The fixtures are turning a little bit in our favour. Forest is a tough game because they've had a really good season, but after that we do have some fixtures to target. So yeah, hopefully an opportunity for the season to turn and for things to start moving in the right direction. Come on, you Irons, and see you next week.